Okay, I'd like to welcome you all to this session of at ACUR for 2021. My name is Jules Lombers and I will be chairing this session. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and whose airways that we share, and pay our respect to elders past and present. I'd like to start our session today with our first presenter, Avni Bharadwaj. So Avni, when you're ready, you can start us off. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everyone, so I did my honours last year at Macquarie University and my area of research was gesture production during encoding and the effect that that has on narrative recall. And I would firstly like to start off by thanking my supervisors, Dr. Nicole Darbu and Associate Professor Naomi Sweller. So gestures are an integral tool for communication and they provide nonverbal information in place of or in addition to speech. They are universally used, so people produce gestures when communicating with an audience that might not be able to see the gestures, such as when speaking to blind people over the phone. And they're also produced by people who have been blind from birth. Also, babies start producing gestures before they start learning to speak, for example, when pointing to things in their environment. And as gestures are produced even when the audience might not be able to see the speaker, it's been assumed that they provide some benefit to the speaker. And indeed, it has been previously shown that gestures support learning in mathematics, spatial tasks, and word and foreign language learning, amongst other areas. So there are different types of gestures, of course, and some are semantically related to what's being said and others aren't. So there are a number of different types of classifications for the types of gestures, but for this study, we used David McNeil's system, for which there are 4 key types. So the first type was iconic gestures, and iconic gestures are semantically related to the content of speech. They show concrete objects, actions, or events. So for example, using 2 fingers moving back and forth to indicate running or walking. Metaphoric gestures are also semantically related to speech. However, they depict more abstract ideas. So for example, someone with their palms facing upwards, moving them up and down to indicate weighing up of options. The final type of gestures which are semantically related to the speech are deictic gestures. And they're used to indicate direction. For example, pointing to or indicating to one side with your hands to show the direction for the exit. And the final type of gestures which McNeil classified were beat gestures. Now, these gestures are not semantically related to speech, but rather they're more rhythmic flicking movements of the hands that can be used to add emphasis. So for example, you'll see teachers using that quite often when they're explaining concepts. So a key theory for why gestures might support learning is that gestures lighten the load on working memory. So working memory is the type of memory that is used to hold and manipulate information in the mind. For example, when someone recites a list of numbers or words backwards. And the idea behind this theory is that gesture and speech are thought to be integrated systems where they convey information through 2 different modes. And in fact, they often give additional information to support what's being said by a person. So in this way, information can be encoded into the working memory during the learning process through both a verbal modality and a visuospatial modality. And indeed, people have been found to gesture more when they're talking about an object that's not in front of them, or in other words, when they're talking about an object that they're holding in their working memory. And to further support this theory, gestures semantically related to speech have also been shown to further benefit working memory, more so than gestures which might not be semantically related. So any gesture research that has looked at the effect of gesture production on narrative recall till date had focused on gestures produced during recall rather than gestures produced during encoding. So the first aim for this current study was to investigate the effect of gesture production during encoding of the narrative on subsequent narrative recall. And this was done by having participants read aloud a narrative while producing gestures and then later asking them questions about the narrative. The second aim was to assess whether the benefits associated with gesture production would be moderated by levels of nonverbal or verbal memory. And for this, participants completed measures to assess nonverbal and verbal working memory. And the final aim was to investigate whether gesture production during encoding would benefit learning the narrative as a whole, or whether it would only benefit learning the parts of the narrative where gestures were produced. And to assess this, there was both a free recall question and a more specific cued recall question phase for the narrative. For the first aim, we expected that those instructed to gesture would recall more of the narrative than those who were instructed not to gesture. We secondly hypothesized that those with lower levels of nonverbal and verbal memory would benefit more from gesture production than those with higher levels of nonverbal memory, supporting the theory that gestures lighten the load on working memory. And the final aim was regarding recall for specific points of the narrative, and we expected that participants would recall more for the specific points of the narrative for which they had produced a gesture at encoding than of the narrative as a whole. So the methodology involved recruiting students from first and second year psychology in Macquarie University. The final sample had 90 participants. For the narrative learning part, there were two key phases, the encoding and the recall phase. In the encoding phase, we had participants read aloud a short narrative in one of three conditions. So they were either in an instructed gesture condition, a no gesture condition, or a spontaneous gesture condition. And in the recall phase, we had participants answer questions about the narrative. So there was a free recall phase where participants were asked to recall all that they remembered, and a cued recall phase where participants were asked specific questions about specific aspects of the narrative. To assess verbal memory, the Ray Auditory Verbal Learning Test was used, and to assess verbal memory, the Ray Complex Figure Test was used. So this study had been designed to be done face-to-face with participants, but due to COVID restrictions coming into place last year in March, the study was conducted on Zoom. And as a result, when participants would be reading aloud the narrative, they were asked to stand so that any gestures they produced with their hands could be clearly seen. In terms of the results and in relation to our findings, for our first hypothesis regarding gesture production during encoding benefiting recall, there was no significant effect of gesture production during encoding on subsequent narrative recall. Our second hypothesis looked at the moderating effects of verbal and nonverbal memory. And in relation to nonverbal memory, we found no significant interactions. However, as you can see with the graph on screen, we found a significant interaction for verbal memory and cued recall. So what we found was that at one standard deviation above the mean for verbal memory, cued recall for the narrative was better for those in both the spontaneous and instructed gesture conditions than for those in the no gesture conditions. However, there was no significant differences between those in the instructed and spontaneous gesture conditions. So what this indicated to us was that gestures benefit those with higher verbal memory more than they benefit those with lower verbal memory. And this was actually contrary to our expectations and the theory that we were using. So we believed that this might be as a result of the instructions given. So we told those with in the no gesture condition to have their hands behind their back. And their inability to gesture may have prevented any benefit that they might have received for those with higher levels of verbal memory. And so there was an equal performance overall for those with lower and higher levels of verbal memory when it came to no gestures. And in terms of our final hypothesis, our results for representational gestures supported our hypothesis. So when participants produced representational gestures at encoding, they were better able to recall that point of the narrative later. However, we found the opposite for deictic gestures, such that deictic gestures, when produced at encoding, actually resulted in worse performance, but this needs to be taken with caution, as only 8 deictic gestures corresponded with cued recall, whereas there were 305 representational gestures which corresponded with cued recall. And so to conclude, gesture key takeaway messages were that gesture production was beneficial for those who had higher levels of verbal working memory. So we believe that, considering the instructions that were given, working memory may be lightened more for those with higher levels of verbal memory than those who have lower verbal memory. And gestures which are semantically related to the accompanying speech may also lighten the load on working memory compared to other types of gestures. So this has key implications for educational settings. Gestures are a very low cost method that can be implemented to benefit and enhance learning. And further, because gestures are universal, they could potentially be implemented in different backgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was extremely, extremely interesting. Very well presented. We are out of time, so we're going to move straight into question time now. We have 5 minutes. So I'll first pass to the judges. Do either of the judges have any questions? Gatra.
Right. Well, thanks, Jules, and thanks very much, Avni, for the presentations. Firstly, congratulations on a job well done in articulating your points. As someone in academia, research such as yours, again, is fundamental as it helps us become better educators and communicators. So I've got a question pertaining your findings and its contributions to the field. I was wondering what it is, if you can tell us, what it is that surprised you most about your findings? And in particular, I'm curious to hear how your findings have added to the existing knowledge and our understanding of the relationship between gesture production and learning. Has it merely reaffirmed the argument that gesture production helps people maintain memories of information provided to them, or is it a lot more than that?
So far, the research before this study looked more, when it came to narrative production in particular, it looked more at production during the recall phase. So when people were asked to remember what they were saying. And so with that, there's theories about, gestures assisting with sort of lexical retrieval. But with this particular study, we looked at the effect of gesture production during encoding itself. So when people were actually learning the narrative, and we found obviously that where representational or semantically related gestures are used, they are in fact beneficial. The key thing that really surprised me with the findings was that it was actually higher levels of verbal memory that benefited more from instructions to use gesture. But again, as I said before, this could have been because the playing field was sort of leveled out with the type of instructions that were given. And so as a result, those with lower levels of verbal memory were trying to focus on not using their hands whilst also trying to learn the narrative at the same time. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Melinda, do you have any questions? Yep.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. And really great presentation. I know it's hard to be in the hot seat, particularly as a researcher, to then, have to be able to espouse it really quickly in 15 minutes when the clock is ticking. So well done. I was really impressed. I just wanted to make the point as well that, with COVID and, your ability to kind of swing to an online data collection model was great. And again, the fact that you went that extra step to think about, well, hang on a minute, I probably need these people to stand up so that, we can capture those little nuances as well. So, good, well done for thinking on your feet in terms of that sort of thing. My question is probably a little bit related to Gatra's, in that, what's the so what to this? So you've got a great kind of pile now of research and data and ideas and thoughts and findings. Where do you think that the application for this is now? Is it theoretical? Is it in future literature? Is it pedagogical in terms of, for children or, adults or, developmental issues, or, what now for this, and what are the opportunities for future research potentially?
So in terms of future research, we actually had an honours student follow up with this study particularly because of the findings that we had in relation to deictic gestures. And so they used a more spatial narrative to sort of more elicit more of those directional gestures. And they were actually able to find the opposite of what I found. So they found that deictic gestures do in fact help with learning and recall. In terms of the wider applications and sort of implications of these findings, what I'm hoping is that this sort of furthers the understanding and the theory behind why gestures might help, but also the aim is to sort of conduct more research, but implement more measures that could actually assess working memory in a more quantitative manner. So we looked just at nonverbal and verbal memory, but I would like to look into cognitive load itself and see if there's a way that we can measure how much effect there is on cognitive load. And then hopefully, as we move forward, this kind of thing might be able to be implemented with children or even with adults with potential developmental delays or disabilities such as autism or something like that as well.
Amazing. Envy, I could actually listen to this all day. I find it a really fascinating topic, but we must wind up. Thank you so much for your enlightening presentation. We must move on though. So next up, we have our second presenter, who is Suzannah Keene. Suzannah, when you are ready, please start presenting. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear and see my screen okay? I'll take that as a yes. Thank you for the opportunity to, that's yes? Yep. Thank you. I'm delighted to be presenting at this year's Australasian Conference of Undergraduate Research. My name is Suzannah Keene, and today I'll be presenting on a topic that's very important to me. The topic of my research is titled Improving the Learning Process Through Understanding Fundamentals in Thermodynamics and Reaction Kinetics. And I welcome any questions at the end of my presentation. Today, I will discuss the background of my research, the pathway I took, and present the findings of my work. I'll also present a discussion on the implications and future directions of this work. Many of us have at some point in our lives struggled to learn something and have ended up feeling frustrated at our lack of progress, leaving us with more questions than answers. This reality is unfortunate, and without proper intervention, the capabilities of a broad range of students can remain unrealised. Due to the dynamic nature of learning, it can be difficult for teachers to always create ideal learning conditions, and students may also be unclear about the conditions in which they best learn. Current literature on learning is based predominantly in the disciplines of behavioural science, psychology, and neurology. When tasked with improving the learning environment, teachers and learners may not address problems effectively due to lack of situational understanding. And even if they are aware of the methods to improve learning, due to the wealth of information available, they can struggle to find relevant information easily. This issue prompted me to investigate whether examining learning from an interdisciplinary perspective could resolve some of these persistent learning problems and add deeper insight to understanding learning. The hypothesis is that the learning environment, rather than the individual or the ideas themselves, can be tweaked and understood to achieve better outcomes. The interdisciplinary avenue taken was a study of chemical processes. Chemical processes whereby change in matter occurs via single or a series of reactions can be improved, optimized, and modified by applying chemical laws. In this research, the pattern of a chemical reactor is likened to the learning environment, and this analogy forms the centerpiece of the research. In addition, concepts in chemical processes are overlaid to the learning process to aid in understanding and provide a distilled way for teachers and students to understand the learning environment. Principles in chemical processes have already been applied to the study of other disciplines, including social systems and economics, indicating promise for using this new avenue of thought. The research is theoretical and exploratory in nature, and the literature used in this research, listed here, draws on a variety of resources. This investigation honed in on the performance equation of a reactor, as it is a suitable and simple comparison to the learning process. The equation summarizes that to achieve output from a chemical reactor, the input, contacting between molecules, and kinetics of the reactions are all at play. The reaction equation was the basis of creation of a novel paradigm encapsulating how to optimize the output of learning. Fundamentally, the output of learning, that is, the acquisition and retention of knowledge, or attitudinal or behavioral change, is a function of ideas, accessibility, and rate. I will now describe the elements of the paradigm and outline how they can be applied in learning. Input into a chemical process is primarily defined as the material and energy added to effect a change. The input can be measured and related to different stages of the chemical process. A parallel to learning follows, and the paper developed this definition of ideas. Like input to a chemical process, ideas refer to the elements that affect a change in the learner or an increase in the student's potential. These contributions can be concrete, abstract, or gestural, and some examples are provided here. The paradigm defines contributions as distinct from the output of the process, and it invites learners and teachers to focus on efforts to the inlet of the process, not only the outcome desired. Furthermore, the paper asserts that ideas need to be tailored to each learner, just as inputs are tailored to each reactor. In general, targeted contact of chemical species facilitates reaction progression. Accessibility is the appropriated definition used in this paradigm. In learning, it can also be said that control and alignment of the information with appropriate learning pathways facilitates the process of learning. It is known that exploration and utilization of multiple learning types activates different modes of thinking, and thus increases the likelihood of learning to occur and the depth of engagement with material. The senses of a learner can be seen as channels and receptors for engagement with knowledge, and each learner is unique. Similar principles apply in chemical processes, and examples are listed here. A common example of a targeted contacting pattern is that increasing the surface area increases contact sites of two reagents, therefore increasing the likelihood that a reaction will proceed. This is similar to the need for learners to engage multiple senses to immerse themselves in learning. With these concepts, the reader is invited to imagine how learners can increase their accessibility to learning. Rate is the final pillar of the paradigm. In chemical reactions, kinetics concerns the speed at which a reaction progresses and any factors contributing to this progress. This research adopts a new definition for learning rate listed here. An immediate example of the relevance of rate is that, for example, distractions while learning at home may hinder learning, whereas good nutrition may be more conducive to retaining information. There are other concepts in chemical processes that affect kinetics, and the research adopts these concepts to factors relevant in learning. These are listed here, and there are also examples of how to improve the learning process. For example, learning can be facilitated by identifying a catalyst or driver for a particular output, increasing a student's engagement and motivation, and by enhancing the factors that contribute to a successful and unhindered learning experience. Now, onto the implication and future directions of the work. The paradigm is applicable to a wide variety of settings to assist implementation of improvements to the learning process, where a student has the intent and capability to understand, and a teacher the willingness to improve the classroom design and learning environment using this framework. The paradigm can be used in multiple subjects areas, not only education or the sciences, as well as in conjunction with other pre-existing methods of analysis. There is the opportunity to use other equations in chemical processes to continue developing the analogy of this work. Similarly, further research from another interdisciplinary angle is suggested to enhance overall understanding of optimum learning environments. The work has scope to be applied in a setting such as a case study, a small classroom environment, and in teacher training courses. In future, it is hoped that the paradigm develops and is able to reach many students and teachers who will be able to tackle those trouble spots in learning and alleviate and deal with those frustrations we commonly experience. Thank you for your attention today, and I invite any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to first ask the judges if they have any questions. Gatra?
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that, Suzannah. Likewise, that was also a very good presentation. You articulate your points quite well. And I think it's a very creative approach to the research topic. So that's why I wanted to, I guess, understand the how you came about in using concepts in chemistry to this research topic, right? So can you clarify again, what do you think the research puzzle is? And tell us what prompted you to explore this puzzle through the angles of thermodynamics and research kinetics, reaction kinetics.
Sure. So firstly, how I came to use thermodynamics. My undergraduate degree is in chemical engineering. And for me, learning about thermodynamics and reaction kinetics and how reactors perform best, I found that there were analogies with concepts such as work or entropy being the amount of disorder. And I felt that there could be a similar parallel drawn with human behavior in the context of learning. And while they are very disparate fields, it was a way in to solving the research problem of often in different learning environments at the primary through to the tertiary and even in our adult lives, there's sometimes barriers which we can't overcome. And I think that if we were to examine it from a more objective perspective, such as through established fundamentals in chemical processes, then we could achieve results that we may not have been able to achieve with current literature. And I think what thermodynamics and reaction kinetics offers, as I mentioned, it's been used in understanding economics. So again, complex systems. I think people are complex systems too, although there's a bit more ambiguity, but I guess that's not within the scope of the research necessarily. But what it does offer is a set of principles about how things work best. And ultimately, I think all teachers know that, to learn requires work. To make a reaction progress, there has to be some kind of work or some engagement with molecules, and things have to be designed correctly. So it's no accident that learning happens. And I think the fundamentals that are in chemical processes was the natural step into the research. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Such an interesting perspective. I never thought to apply it like this. Melinda, yep.
Yeah, thanks, Jules. Thanks, Suzannah. I always applaud the bravery of people to put their ideas out there. So well done, really good presentation.
Thank you.
Again, from I'm a social sciences background, so to see this kind of come from an engineering perspective is really fascinating and a really creative approach. I'm interested, I like the definition that you had, sort of towards the front of your presentation around ideas. And take your point around students and classroom learning, even right up to the tertiary level where we kind of live and breathe, I guess. Have you thought about the application of this, or is it perhaps, an opportunity to further apply your research into sort of everyday learning? So, in workplaces, learning and development, organisational development, and those types of applications.
Definitely. I think it can be used in the everyday. I think also after I developed this, I must say that my own understanding of the way I learn was enhanced, because I thought, actually, I obey chemical laws in a weird sort of way. But I think, let's say with an organizational development way, let's imagine a team of people, they learn differently. You may have an interdisciplinary team. So if you're teaching them about finance, then you might have people who are really good at commerce, but then other people who may be lawyers by trade, so not be so good with numbers. So understanding that people have different learning rates, and therefore, the people who are not so good with numbers might need to engage with numbers on a different level to get up to scratch. I think that's important for managers to know how to do. I think using this paradigm requires a degree of empathy too, and time to self-reflect. I guess that's what all improvements require. But I think, yeah, even let's say a child riding a bike, you know, there's the idea of seeing your dad ride the bike. There's also the practical part. So doing the act itself and uniting that with the visual. I think that's one example of where ideas as a concept manifests itself. And, you know, children are always learning from the environment. So there's a lot of possibilities for this too.
Thank you.
Suzannah, we are almost out of time. There is a question from an attendee. Unfortunately, you won't have time to answer it, but I will read it to you so that you can think about it for the future, was just, thank you for your clear presentation. Unlike a chemical, humans are all different and have the capacity to disrupt what might seem to be a logical process. How does your model cope with individual differences? So I'll leave that with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for asking that question. And now, and I'd like to thank you very much for bringing that perspective to us all. As an ex-teacher as well, it's definitely given me something to think about. And I'd like now to move to our final presenter. So Shuo, I will pass to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Shuo, and it's my honor to be here. Thanks for having me. Today, the topic of my presentation is the role of university support in low SES, which represents low socioeconomic status students' challenging experience, a qualitative research with 2 cases. By the way, I welcome any questions during the whole process. So this presentation consists of 4 parts: introduction, methods, results, and conclusions. Firstly, I want to clarify some facts here about low SES students. 1 in 4 Australian citizens are recognized as coming from a low SES community, but only 50% of them have ever enrolled in university education. They are not only faced with financial challenges, which have been found one of the most significant barriers to their success. The financial stress reduces the possibility of academic success because low SES students have to make a balance between their work and study. Students from disadvantaged backgrounds experienced more stressful emotions than their high SES counterparts. They have more difficulty relating themselves to university context. What is worse is the stigmatization of low SES students with incompetence and failure. But what is worth more investigation is the role of university in the experience of low SES students. The Australian National University is constantly ranked as one of the best universities and have the lowest acceptance rate in Australia. However, ANU actually has one of the lowest number of low SES students across Australia, which means that low SES students are underrepresented in Australian National University, which is worth more investigation. So the method I adopt here is this case study is actually part of the program called Exploring the Experience of the University for Students from Low SES Backgrounds, hosted by the Engagement and Success Team at ANU. A case study design was constructed to collect collective data from interviews with low SES students in ANU. So this program has 12 interviews in total, but I only analyzed 2 of them and code the data with NVivo 12. For your information, NVivo 12 is a tool which you can do qualitative research, coding phrases and words. So I faked the names of the 2 interviewees just for their privacy, Jack and Rose. You can see I'm a big fan of Titanic. Jake comes from Logan, Queensland, one of the most disadvantaged urban regions within Queensland, and is currently living on campus. He's studying a Bachelor of Health Science in ANU in the medical pathway, in which only the top 30 students from this degree can be selected for a medical place. He's under the formal classification of use allowance on Centrelink, and his parents are under the income threshold. He's currently on a bursary from his college, and he will be a residential advisor next year because he wants to earn a bursary. Rose also lives on campus, but she transferred from Monash to ANU in 2018. She used to study at Monash University because she could not afford ANU. She came from Melbourne, and Monash provided her with a 5-year, $6,000 per year scholarship. So she took a gap year just to save money for studying at ANU. And she's subsidized by Centrelink and several scholarships in ANU. So here, we actually got we code the challenges of the students, and here are the 3 main challenges they are faced with: financial challenges, interpersonal challenges, and academic challenges. I also put some of their some quotes of their talks here in how they describe their challenges, as you can see from the right. Thankfully, that year, which means the year of transferring to ANU, I did get the Equity Accommodation Scholarship, which is $5,000. When I got it, I cried because there is something with how stressed I was. It really came at such a great time. It is certainly not like life-changing in the total grand scheme of relocation costs, but at the same time, $5,000 still can go so far from Rose. You can see how scholarships are important for low SES students to release their financial stress. The second quote is also from Rose. I'm feeling quite alienated from peers with the nature of ANU, as for such a long time had the same group of people that are more wealthy. So the actual culture and ecosystem, like norms and the leadership, are all perpetuated by these same privileged people. It can be an alienating experience at a low-income student, to enter into this space. You can see they actually find it quite challenging to, really get into the groups of people, the privileged cohorts of students at ANU. The third one is about the academic challenges they have. It's definitely a big jump from high school to university, especially a university as academically strenuous as ANU. While I can't say I've been doing that badly in terms of the grades I've been achieving, they haven't really been what I've been waiting to achieve or what I would expect. So it is not only about the academic stress they have, but also about they cannot fulfill their ambitions, their expectations on their academic success. So accordingly, they come up with 3 things they expect the university to improve: the selection process of scholarship, the low SES students' engagement at university, and the blindness of university support that we can see in the next slide. The selection process of scholarships. So Jack said, scholarships cannot refer to income statements or the level of SES, but I think in a sense, if ANU can make forms of documents that emphasize that there is a place for low SES students or increase the number of scholarships, students are going to feel more empowered to apply. There could be more scholarships available, but on the basis of SES. Rose also talked about her experience here. You are always going to see a lot of issues with the way leadership is understood and measured in the same leadership-based scholarship or academic merit-based scholarships. So they feel like the scholarships are just for leadership things or the merit-based things, which can be more accessible, more available for students from privileged backgrounds, but not low SES students. So when it comes to their engagement at university, in the beginning, I was struggling silently. Everyone was going to parties and social events, and I was in my room because I could not do those things. So they are kind of like restricted in their place that they do not have much time and much space for like socializing with other students because they have to make money. They don't have enough money for like social events. In ANU, equity is either rural or indigenous, and they don't think about the shades of other kinds of disadvantage. So Rose actually checked the vision plan and found that there is no like exact measures they come up with for low-income students. So they come up with like 4 measures they expect the university to improve. Firstly is to provide additional scholarships and funds for first-year low SES students. The second one is to give more special considerations or class arrangements to students who have part-time jobs. The third one is to increase the involvement of low SES students in official organizations such as ANUSA, which represents ANU Students Association. The fourth one is to listen to the voice of low SES students at the university. So here comes conclusion. The aim of this research is to explore the role of university in the experience of students from low SES backgrounds and come up with suggestions to improve this situation. This study have identified 3 challenges in terms of financial, interpersonal, and academic things. And the lack of university work can be seen from these challenges. So the findings of this study suggest that the university should promote the selection process of scholarship, improve low SES students' engagement at the university, and expand university support. And that's probably the end of this presentation. I also want to say thank you to my 2 excellent, intelligent supervisors from ANU, Dr. Olivia Evans from the School of Psychology and Ms. Sarah Walker from the Engagement and Success team. I also want to say thank you to my parents because I knew they bought the supporter tickets and currently sitting in front of the computer screen watching this presentation. Thank you for your unconditional love and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 3 seconds to spare. Excellent. Okay. Any questions from the judges? We might go with Melinda first.
Just pipped you at the post, Gatra.
Thank you.
Thank you. That presentation was really interesting, and I can see you've put a lot of not only intellectual thought into this, but there's a lot of love behind this project, and that comes through in spades. My question is around, I can see that you picked 2 case studies in particular from ANU and Monash. Have you thought about the application of your work, you know, from the bigger G08 universities into some of the smaller, you know, smaller campuses and smaller schools potentially?
Yeah. So I think because there has been some studies on students from low SE backgrounds in different universities, including universities in indigenous places. So I think the challenges are pretty, like, they shared some common challenges in terms of financial situations or academic stress or like interpersonal relationships. So I think in ANU, the situation is just tougher because the number of low SE students is just smaller, so compared to other universities. So I think the measures we want to be applied in ANU can be also applied to other universities, including small universities, which can be, I think it might be easier for small universities to like conduct these measures because they have like a larger proportion of low SES students. So one of the examples can be when we run the Students Association, we want to like put a special position for low SES students, which means that their voice can be listened by the university working staff. Yeah.
Thank you. Gatra.
Right. Well, thanks, Jules. And thanks so much, Shuo, for the presentation. Again, that was also a very well done presentation. And just echoing Melinda, I can definitely tell that you're very passionate about this topic. And I'm happy to hear that you were supervised by Sarah Walker, who runs the Engagement Success team. So at least, you know, the team can get your feedback. I wanted to ask you about your methodology and specifically the selection of your 2 cases. I'm curious to know why you have only chosen 2 subjects, and based on what criteria have you selected them on?
Yeah, this program actually has like 12 interviewees in total, but I only choose 2 of them because I want to, you know, I want to give more insights into the personal stories of a person. Like these two students are quite like typical low SES students because you can tell, let me turn to that page. of their personal story. You can tell it from the personal story of Jack Rose. Jack, he's currently in a really big struggle for his medical place. So the academic stress he is faced with is much more tough and much more bigger than other counterparts, than other low SES students. And for Rose, because she really have a lot of insights about how the measures can be taken to improve the university support and stuff like that. And also she's also faced with a lot of challenges. Like she used to study at Monash. She's originally from Melbourne, which means that her accommodation costs can be like, she doesn't need to pay anything about like accommodation fee back in Melbourne, but she really like struggled a lot, like determined to move to ANU for her study. So they have more like expectations on what this degree can bring to them. So I think their situation are pretty typical and worth investigation. That's why I choose these two cases for more study, to have more insights into their experience.
Sorry, thanks. Sorry, do you mind, Jules? Yeah. Just as a follow-up, I think that's fine. I think if you intend to turn this into a paper, I know you're in Shanghai Jiatong now, but you want to revisit this research topic and turn it into a paper, perhaps expanding the number of respondents would be good as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. We only have about 20 seconds left, so there's probably no more time for questions there, but thank you very much. I can't comment too much because I sit under Sarah Walker, so I would be being biased. That is my team. So, and obviously the program that I run is all around low SES and equity. So I'm really pleased that you've chosen this as your paper, and we will definitely be working harder on this, won't we, Gatra? I'm going to get him onto this. So anyway, thank you very much to all of our presenters. What a fantastic day I've had today, and this is, I feel so privileged to be part of it. Congratulations to you all. Thank you to our audience for coming along and listening. You should all be feeling very proud. Judges, thank you very much. Melinda Tunbridge and Gatra Priyandita, thank you very much. And thank you for all of your time. Congratulations, everybody. We look forward to the rest of ACUR, and we'll see you all in some more sessions. Thank you.